May Blood is one of these people who once met, never forgotten. And I think the impact that she made as a person and the way that she represented who she was and her background always brought a different dimension into everything that she did, her own very personal dimension. And I think for many people, even when she died in October 2022 at the ripe old age of 84, she was one of the youngest spirits in the room for a very long time. She managed to keep herself energetic and focused in a way which represented people and interests and ideas. Nobody was left in any doubt whatsoever about what those were, but in a way which, in a society like ours, which was dominated by conformity, dominated by often by male voices, and dominated by middle class, educated voices and all of that. May was, in a sense, the opposite, but demanded that equality was in the room when she was there. And that, I think, left an impression on people that you always got what you saw. I was looking up, just by way of starting this, my name's Duncan Morrow, by the way, and I work in this institution. But I've had a lot of time outside the institution. And May's history, once you start looking at it, was remarkable, really. She's Baroness May Blood. And she's one of these people for whom, for me personally, and it's probably one of the reasons I wanted to do this, aristocracy was kind of natural. She assumed that she was in charge. But if you look at her history, she starts from the opposite end of that telescope. May was born, I know she was very associated with the Shankill, but I'm afraid she was born in the Sandy Row, and which is nearly as big a transfer as you can get in this community. But she was born off Roden Street in the Donegal Road district in 1938. But she lived in one of the working class districts which were mixed from an early stage. There was people of all backgrounds in Magnetic Street with her mother and her sister, so it was a women's environment. It was very much that kind of a place. Her father worked in the shipyard, but for the first 6 years of May Blood's life, he was away in the army. So I think that was quite a common experience for people in working class in the late 1930s, because that was reality. People were away, and households had to change and adapt to very difficult realities. And her mother worked as a cook in Mackey's Foundry. She attended Donegal Road Methodist Church Primary School and went to Linfield Secondary School on the Sandy Row. And at the age she left school, as was the norm of the time, at 14. 14, and went to work in a linen mill. And the linen mills, of course, were the lifeblood of South and West Belfast, and were the industry which kept women employed most in any part of Belfast, I suppose. But so May was, to start off, a millie. She was part of the life of Belfast from working class women's point of view. And that experience shaped her whole life, because I think the experience of just the working conditions, but also of the way people were treated, and of the camaraderie of the workers, was very much part of what made May tick. And you can see, if anybody who knew her will know that that was something which never left her, and it was something where she was never going to apologise for, and never going to say there was anything to even suggest there was anything to apologise for. And so I think that shaped her very much. And she became involved in the trade union movement, and the trade union movement, I think, was a formative experience, partly because it is about representing interests and workers and knowing the things that you have to say, but partly because actually it was possibly the macho male environment that you could imagine. It put people right at the front of confrontation in a way that was, in that time, very stereotypical, and May had to find her way there. And I think that is part of the story. May had to find her way in uncommon places as somebody who had allies, but had to find allies and had to insist on the right to say it. So May's career then takes her, and I'm not going to go through it because we will be going through it with the people here, into areas and issues which I think she left a mark on so many different issues. Part of why I want to do this is really to highlight just how many different things that May was involved in and just how many different things that she shaped. And so as a story, it's also a story of the social history of Belfast in many ways, because the change was in her life and through the kind of issues that she was dealing with. And we're going to hear from Eileen Weir, who's currently in the Shankill Women's Centre and has been there for a long time. And I know Eileen from years and years of inter-community work. But Eileen's connection with May goes back right into the trade union movement and what the trade union movement was about. And we'll hear from Eileen just talking about what that was like and how those battles and what those battles were and how she and May and all the others that were involved in that got through that. She then, when she stopped being that, she was joined social issues. She became a community worker. She became somebody who was heavily involved. She didn't have children of her own, but she was extremely dedicated to families and children and to women. And what's it called when they say fresh start? Early years was Shankill Early Years was her total commitment. She was the chair of Bernardo's, which was one of the biggest children's charities looking after the same issues, and it was a driving issue in her life. So you find that if you have three themes, you're talking about the trade unions, you're talking about women and children, and you're talking about then her final passion that she was identified with for years in the last 10 years was probably the integrated education movement. And that came together in her political life, because in her political life she was a Labour politician. She was a British Labour politician, but she was a Labour politician who saw it as her job was to represent working class women and people who wanted change in society and to represent everybody as far as she could, for the many, not the few. So I am very honoured to have a panel of this scale here. Over to you, Eileen. Eileen, you knew probably May longest in terms of time and in her work in the trade union movement.
That doesn't mean to say I'm the same age as May. Like. I probably was in the late 70s that I first came across May within the trade union movement. I worked in Gallagher's tobacco factory, and it was a big deal even for a woman to be elected within Gallagher's tobacco factory to join a trade union. And in late 70s, early 80s, the trade union decided to set up a women's advisory committee. It was the Transport and General Workers Union. And that was the first time that I sat in a room with May Blood. And there was a lot of things. Abla Kamari was the women's officer at that time. And there was a lot of things happening within the trade union movement, and women weren't getting their voices. So the Amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union, which was a north-south union, decided that, okay, let's shut these women up within the ranks, and every region will have a women's advisory committee. So the Women's Advisory Committee, and I can remember the first meeting that we ever had as the Women's Advisory Committee, and May actually chaired the Women's Advisory Committee, and she says, now, we've been set up to keep us quiet. God help them, because we're not just going to be a wee group of women sitting up the stairs in the top floor in Transport House playing lip service. So we got down to it. And I was very fortunate because there was a generation and a half between myself and May. And May, even way back then, was very much into younger and older people working together. You know, it wasn't just about the older people, it was about trying to bring younger people into the ranks. And way from the very, very beginning that she nurtured. Didn't do anything for us, but she would have nurtured us, because May was a firm believer that if you're not doing it for yourself, then you're not going to learn how to do it. So you were through into the deep end in numbers of occasions. And I can actually remember an ICTU conference in Malahide, and May's passion then, many's a fight that we had. A debate, sorry, not a fight, a debate. It was always a fight with May, and her passion was low paid. And I worked in Gallagher's, so I wasn't allowed to open my mouth because she didn't know what low pay was until you actually were earning low pay. So you didn't have the right to speak about it because she can't understand being paid a low wage. She says to me, see, when you're fighting for more toilet rolls in Gallagher's, I'm fighting for a toilet in the mills. That's the difference. So, you know, she was very, very passionate in making sure that women were actually looked after in the workplace. So that shut me up, working for Gallagher's, good wage and everything else. And I can remember that conference in Malahide. May never, in all the years that she was involved in the trade union, long before me, never went to the rostrum, never spoke at the rostrum. She attended it. Her pen never stopped taking notes on a piece of paper. And I can remember that conference, and it was somebody up speaking from another union, talking on low pay. And May was sitting beside me with her notebook and her pen, writing away, talking to herself, saying, they don't know what they're talking about. That's not what happens. How can they say? And I'm going, May, get up there and say what you're saying instead of chirping in my ear. And somebody had said something else about low pay, and she says, right, that's it. So that was the very first time that May actually went to the rostrum in her history, and she never came away from a rostrum after that. Every other conference, when it came to low pay, May was up there. And then I can remember the other debate around equal pay. The equal pay legislation came in, and it came to the Women's Advisory Committee, and we were going through I have to say, we were trained out of our skins within the trade union movement. The stuff that we were actually educated in, you know, before they even hit the ground, was unbelievable. Fair Employment Act, Equal Opportunities Act, Flags and Ambulance Act. We had it drilled into us. But when the Equal Opportunity, or when the Equal Pay Act came in, it wasn't good enough for me. It wasn't good enough for me, because May said at one of our meetings, equal pay is fine, yes, and we all deserve equal pay, but I want equal pay for equal value. Because when she was working in the mills, the men were the high-paid workers, but the women were the ones that was getting the product out. And the women were the ones that were working the hardest. The men were in cutting rooms, cutting the material, but the women were pushing the trolleys, pushing the crates, pushing everything to the mills. So that was a campaign for equal pay, for equal value, and we were successful in that, as everybody knows. But I think a lot of the things for me coming from the Shankill Road at that time, during the conflict, I thought I was living in a completely different world when I joined the trade union movement, because everything that I knew, everything that I had been told within my own community, I found out that they were all myths and all lies. And it was good to have May there, who actually was from a similar area than me, that, you know, all these women can't be wrong. So I, along with May, for a long time, we had to lead double lives, because we were campaigning for things within the trade union movement that we actually couldn't be vocal about within our own communities. So I think she taught me to do things under the radar, and as long as the job was done, it didn't matter who done it, as long as the job was done. But many of our famous thing was when we had, because there was a lot of women around that table from right across the whole island, and, you know, we all had a lot of differences. And when we got hot and heated and in the debates, I said, right, that's okay. We agree to disagree. We'll agree to differ, and let's move on to the important stuff. And that's the way. May was a driver. And, you know, in her later years, when she was retired, and I think being retired from the mills didn't stop May being in touch with all those women that she lived with and in the mills, because they were her family. She really done, even when she was retired, made sure they got the right benefits, made sure that they were looked after, made sure they got the biggest redundancy package that she could actually negotiate for them. And she was well got right across the whole textile industry. I happened to be the one that we shared, and because there was no money, or still no money these days, and you had to buddy up in rooms. And me and May were the two that buddied up in rooms, and she was the most independent woman that I ever knew. She took a wee heart problem and later on, and she had to go on a wee tablet to put under her tongue. And you know, when you go to these trade union conferences, you do have a wee sip of drink, you know, and you go to bed a wee bit, you know, lightheaded. And I can remember going into the room one night and saying to May, where's your wee heart tablets? I know where they are, Eileen. I says, no, I know you know where they are, May. Can you let me know where your heart tablets are? I says, why do you want to know where my heart tablets was? I says, in case in the middle of the night you take a wee attack, I know where to get you your tablets. Lie down, go sleep. As long as I know where my tablets are, nobody else needs to know where my tablets are. So she was so independent, it was frustrating at times. But she had a mind, and she was way ahead of everybody else. And that showed, you know, when the trade union movement and the role that she took within the trade union movement after Avla actually moved on. They advertised a job for a women's officer, and in the meantime, John Freeman put her in, asked her, would she step in and do the women's officer for the Transport and General Workers Union at that time. And that was a role she didn't want to do. She didn't want to be in that role because May was grassroots, May was hands-on, and that just wasn't the role that May wanted. So she said that she told John Freeman it was a stopgap. I'm only going to do it until you get somebody else to do it, but I'm giving you a time limit for me to do it, because that was something that she didn't want to do. Now, when she done it, she was absolutely fantastic at it, but May's heart was in the community. May's heart was at grassroots, at hands-on, and you find that most trade unions, that's where their heart lies anyway, but May certainly did, you know, didn't want to be in any rightful position of power within the trade union movement, because that means that she couldn't shout and she couldn't make changes and she couldn't be the one to lobby for change within the trade union movement.
Thanks so much. I think you really set a picture there of who May was and where she came from. After she went into the community, and for really all of the rest of her life, and probably even before, the Shankill Road was the core of where May came from and was. Ballygomartin, she lived up there, she never moved, it was always her life. Betty, you've worked in the Shankill Road. What was May's contribution in all of that?
Yeah, well, that leads me straight into where she went. She started off in a wee place called Carnmartin Wood Products, where she worked mainly with young boys. And apparently she just loved these young boys, and these young boys just loved her. And that was her first kind of community job. They made wee bits and pieces of wooden furniture. And the story that I have heard, I remember May telling me about this seat that she got for a garden that they made. And apparently that was still in her garden after she died, this wee seat. She was also chair of Spring Martin Action Group, Black Mountain Action Group, actually. Very, very proud to be that. And she lived up at the top of Spring Martin, where the wall is, the peace wall. And I don't know whether this was, I don't know if she just like waiting up young boys or what, but she told all the young boys up there that she owned this wall. Apparently she called it the Million Brick Wall. Yeah, that's the story. million pound wall, million brick wall. And she owned it, and she built that to keep herself safe and so on and so forth. I know that up there as well, in the Black Mountain Action Group, she was chair up there, and she was very, very forceful chair, and got a lot of change made up around Black Mountain. She had a neighbour up there who also works in the community, who I went to school with, Dale. And Dale lived in one house, and May was on one side of her, and May's sister was on the other side. So Dale had a ball with the two of these. And the other sister, Elsie, she used to tell fortunes, and Elsie liked to drink. So we would have brought her into Shankill Women's Centre on a regular basis to tell us our fortunes. And I don't know how many kids she told between us all, which told us all we were going to have 3 kids or 33 kids or whatever, but it was £3 to get your fortune told. And May used to tell her off all the time, but it was good crack. I had a laugh with her. My main memory is knowing her. I kind of went to Shankill Women's Centre one day to sign up and was doing an A-level, and all of a sudden just got trailed into it and was voted on to be on the Greater Shankill Partnership Board, and was took up, met Jackie. I knew Jackie somewhat, and I knew Joe Stewart. There was this woman, May, and she scared the life out of me. Just even to look at her scared the life out of you. But, you know, when you got to know her, she took me to the partnership board meetings with her, and it was mainly, well, I can say definitely, there must have been 20 to 25 men in the room, plus me and May. And, of course, I hung on to her like a leech. Made sure I sat beside her and everything, and she was really good at mentoring me and talking me through, telling me who people were and why they were doing things within the room. And gradually, as I learned as I went along, till the point that she left me to go on my own. So I was sitting on my own with maybe 25 of these men. But no, she was really good in terms of mentoring. She wasn't a bit behind the door, as everybody knows. She told you what was what. But a couple of things, I mean, it was sort of a wee funny story about her, and quite a sad one. Jackie Redpath and I went one time up to the Long Gallery to hear her speak about her life story, and we had a student with us, and we were sitting there, and May was telling this story, and it was when she lived in Roden Street, and she told of not having outside toilets then. You didn't have an inside toilet. And she said about this coming, you had to come down the stairs at night and make your way through the clocks to get out to the toilet. So me and Jackie kind of knew what she was talking about, and a lot of older people in the room knew. And on the way back in the car, we were talking about this, and the student just popped up from the back and said, "Didn't I have to walk through clocks? Why was there clocks on the floor?" And it was only when it dawned on us, or we went into fits laughing, because obviously she meant cockroaches, because that's what clocks were short for, cockroaches. So, I mean, she was brought up in pretty much poverty, as a lot of people in these areas, in these kind of deprived areas, was at the time. But then one day I would have called in on a regular basis to talk to her about the stuff in the Women's Forum. She set up and ran the Women's Forum, chaired it. Again, we had most of the meetings up in Spring Martin, in a sort of an old rundown house up there. But May welcomed any woman in the area, or anybody that could come, anybody that get themselves up from Shankill. We were packed in the house, maybe 50 of us, all just sitting there talking. And from that stemmed, there was money coming from, I think it was coming from Europe too, and it was for the Spectrum Centre, and there was more money, and we discussed it among ourselves and realised that the families and children, and there needed to be an investment made in children and young people. And going beyond that, then the early years came about. She headed that up. She headed up all the meetings leading up to it, and was instrumental, really very, very instrumental in helping that be set up. And that was one of her major babies at the time. But during that period of time, I remember calling in to see her about something, and she was crying. And I nearly died. This woman, May, crying. And I said, I thought she was going to tell me somebody had died. And she just handed me this bit of paper, and she had been sent an anonymous letter. And it was absolutely horrendous what was written in that letter. Basically, you're this, that and the other thing, and you don't speak for me and don't dare speak for me and blah, blah, blah. And at the time, everybody hugs everybody nowadays. At the time, it wasn't a huggy thing, and you certainly didn't hug me. So I kind of put my hand on her arm to say, are you all right, you know? But I think the most important thing in that for me, and even to say to you people today, she was a woman with feelings. She was like ourselves, you know, she was human. And even though we'll talk about her being this very strong, powerful, you know, and she could get on with things, she was still a woman who had feelings and got moved and got upset about stuff. So there was that, and then the next bit I kind of remember is getting in to see her and her telling me about the Baroness. And I said to her, here, what do you do there? You don't take it? And she went, Betty, you don't say no to these things. You know, I went, oh, right, okay. The last that I seen her, she was only about 2 months before she died, and she was in our centre. She came in to talk to a group of students, and you know, she might have been talking the same 30 years. She had all the power. She said what she had to say. She didn't slip up. She was really good. I could have killed her because she wouldn't sit down. She was starting up and she was on a stick, and you knew she needed to sit, but she wouldn't sit. But she was standing there and as proud as punch that she could do what she could do. And really, to finish, I was talking to one of the carers who looked after her when she died, and he said that she was an absolute model patient and strong and as outspoken as ever, even till the very end. And he said he was just proud to be her carer at the end. So.
Thank you very much. And the sense of a woman who belonged to her place, but was very much a woman and a part of the community, as a community member, not simply always the one who was knew all the answers, but was involved in so many different things. Perhaps in her latter years, apart from being a baroness, May was most well known for her commitment to integrated education. Integrated education in Northern Ireland, as you all know, has been essentially a voluntary activity. It's been driven by parents, it's been driven by people like me, it's been driven by supporters, and has been picked up at various points by the state. But nearly everything in the integrated education movement was driven by people stepping forward and doing things. And May became, by the end, I think, very much the face of integrated education. She had become the person who had most identified herself with the cause. So, Paul, you've worked with her over the last many years, and just a word on who she was within the integrated education movement and what she brought to that and what her commitment to it was.
Okay, thank you, Duncan, and thanks for the opportunity to speak about May. And it's a hard thing to do, to speak for a few minutes about May Blood. We've worked together for 22 years. I'm delighted my colleague Brian Small is here today as well, because if it wasn't for Brian and his foresight to think about asking May to join what was a little fundraising committee, I don't think I would have got to know her. So I appreciate that, Brian. But everything with May is about stories. And so the first time, I didn't know where to start, but the first time I thought I should start is the first time I ever met her. When she came into the Integrated Education Fund offices, and she basically, said, what do you want me for, and all that sort of stuff. And we said, well, look, we'll ask you to join a fundraising committee. And it'll only be for 1 hour, for 6 weeks, for 6 months. And May says, well, so long as that's all it is, I'm on. And of course, as you know, 22 years later. But our chairman at that time was the late Sir Robert Cooper, and he couldn't quite get it. Brian came downstairs and said, there's something about May Blood. And that's the best way of putting it. There's something about her. And Bob says, but she's got no money, Brian. She's got no money. He says, but I don't know, there's something about her. And when you met May for the first time, and she said, look, there are people who will literally cross the road to avoid me because they think I'm going to ask them for something. She actually made the perfect champion and the perfect campaign chair. And there's another reason for that too, because May was deeply cynical about integrated education for many years. She thought integrated education was something to do with, this is the flipping middle-class do-gooders living out in the leafy suburbs in North Down. This isn't for the people of the Shankill or the people for Spring Martin, not for the young people that she works with. So, of course, when she got her title, she was inundated with requests. Can you come to our prize giving? And she would do tons of stuff like that. But she was invited up to Hazelwood College in North Belfast, which will bring it back to look north. And she went into the school, and she went down the corridor, and she could hear these wee voices going, hello, May. Hello, May. She realises, there's wee so-and-so, and there's wee so-and-so. And she literally told me that that's when the penny dropped. That's when she realised, where have I... This isn't the case at all. There are kids in working class communities benefiting from integrated education. And so, as you know, the history goes, it very much became her passion in life. And I just want to speak about, I suppose, her values and principles. And I'm looking at Janine's in the audience as well. And this sums it all up. So when May became on board as a volunteer, as a good charity, of course, you like to pay your volunteers' expenses, and they're entitled to that. And I remember Janine coming into the boardroom one day with the expense form and says, May, that's for you. She says, what is it? He says, oh, it's a little expense form, just in case you need to claim anything. And May goes, really? She says, I know what I'll do with that. And she took it up, and she ripped it up, and she put it in the bin. And that was May. You know, she had that incredible sense of equity and fairness. I think probably when you talk to her, we talked about Magnetic Street and growing up in Roden Street, and the fact that her father went to defend their Catholic neighbours on an 11th night, because they built this, remember they used to build the bonfires up against the gable walls, and their house was at risk of catching fire and had caught fire, and May's father went out and defended their neighbours. So in return, May's family was burnt out instead. I think that stayed with her because she did, Duncan mentioned that she grew up in a mixed community, and she had friends from right across the mill as well. I mean, you didn't care what religion you were in the mill, you just wanted to get on with your colleagues and your neighbours. And she always said we only had one enemy, and that enemy was the boss. Yeah, that was the one we all united against. And I remember, I hope this one's accurate, with the Ulster Workers' Strike in 1974, and the barricades had gone up, and May was going down, as you do, going to work. And he says, where are you going? He says, I'm going to work. You're not. Ulster Workers' Strike, love, way back home again. May says, no chance. I says, you're not crossing this line. And May says, all right then. I says, I'll tell you what, we'll do a deal. You pay my wages and I'll go home. And that's true. And she snacked underneath it and went down to the mill to work. And I think, you know, when you see those principles that she stood for, I was thinking today, probably two words that I always remember about May is fear, because you could put the fear of God into you. You didn't want to get on the wrong side of her. And fun. I think there was a fun side to May Blood that, you know, she was always joking. Half the time you didn't know whether she was being serious or not. Duncan was Duncan Donuts. So if he came walking into the room, oh God, there's donuts. You know, she always had a little put down. And I'll share a couple of classics with you. And I told this one to Tim McGarry last year. We had a big event to celebrate her life. And Tim says, you any good bits for me? He says, yeah. So anyway, we had a fundraising gala one year, and Basil McRae was in the audience. He was the only politician, I should say, who was there. And May got up to give her speech, and she was ripping into the politicians and ripping into the government, as she would do. And out of the crowd, we could hear this little voice, and it was Basil, and he stood up, and he says, not me, May. I'm 100% behind you. May replied, sit down, Basil. You're 100 years behind me. And I swear, I thought, unbelievable, you know. And I should have, well, this is going to be on camera. One other one was Mark Crothers one night with one of May's, I think, last and only appearance on The View. And I can't remember what the question was. And May just turned around, you were there, Duncan. And she says something like, oh, you're talking a load of nonsense. What are you asking me a question like that for? And so it went on. And at the end of the show, Mark pulled May to one side and says, May, what did I do? What did I say? He says, you were talking a load of ill nonsense and I told you that. He says, May, you don't realise this. My mother's going to be on the phone to me tonight. She's not going to speak to me again because you've upset May Blood. But look, I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk more. I mean, what she did for integrated education is what Duncan asked me for, was phenomenal. She travelled the world with Brian and I. She organised events. She used her title to open doors. And that's what she loved to do. She used to bring school children in. She'd bring people in for a drink. She'd bring people in for lunch, always at her own expense. And she wanted to use her title to do good and to help raise money, and she wasn't afraid to ask for money. And we found our donors absolutely adored her for that. And I'll finish because I could talk for hours about her, is very, very recently, so Betty was talking about May's health not being great. And we had a donor who was there, always about, didn't give us a lot of money initially, but when he could see May's health declining and Brian retiring, it was James Hagan, the home builder, and he announced to us 2 years ago that he was going to give us £1 million for integrated education in memory of May Blood and what she had done. She was still alive at the time, but he wanted to make that contribution, and he did that because of May, because she got things done. You know, she wanted action. She used to always say to me, I hate warm words, Paul. If I hear any more warm words, she says, what we need is action. And that's what she did. She was an incredible person. I could talk a lot more later, Duncan, but yeah, but thank you.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks, everybody. So many different aspects of this, but one thing I wanted to ask was, you know, May had to operate, as we all do in Northern Ireland, with the complexities of Northern Ireland, and she was somebody, as you say, who was a big presence, but wasn't necessarily always making big speeches of that kind of nature. She was part of the trade unions as a, I suppose, a socialist, really. She was part of the Shankill Road. She was very much from that kind of heartland loyalist community of Belfast. She was in the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition because that mattered to her from the perspective of putting new voices onto the table. She became a member of the Labour Party because she was a peer of the realm. When you think about politics in May, how did May fit with a kind of political? What was her political approach? Was her approach to use politics for people, or was it about a particular set of values, or how did you experience that? I mean, Eileen, you were with her during those years.
The Women's Coalition didn't do a bad thing by making her their electoral manager, you know, to manage the campaign. I don't think May done it for the sake of politics. I think it was for the sake of not having women's voices being heard, you know, within communities. And there was, when they announced the ceasefires, Monica and Pearl and May went into the Loyalist prisoners to speak to the Loyalist prisoners, and they actually apologised for the way that the unionists were actually treating May and the other ones round the table that actually had been elected into power. There was a case one time when Ian Paisley asked her to pour the tea. Very brave, wasn't he? But obviously that didn't happen. So I don't think. May was a very private person. You didn't get to know May. May was very, very private in herself, kept her own personal life very, very private. But she's seen the need for, at that time, to give, in particular, women and families a focus on hope for a peace process. And I don't think it was the political thing. It was about having the women's voices heard when they were sitting down round the table to negotiate a peace agreement, because women's voices weren't being heard. And, you know, it was only when the Women's Coalition was never set up to be, and there's a couple of members of it in the audience, so I better be very careful on what I say, but it was never set up to be a political party. It was a coalition. And there was a lot of differences within the Women's Coalition. And May actually insisted that Pearl was actually the deputy leader because, in May's words, Pearl was a street fighter, and that's what we needed round the table. And Monica was an epidemic round the table. So we didn't just have, epidemics round the table. We had a street fighter around the table as well. So, even within the coalition, she wanted that balance. She didn't want an us and them, and it wasn't about political. It was about getting women's voices heard. And we can see today, if the Women's Coalition hadn't have done what they'd done at the time, sent a letter, can we get a woman round the table? Yes, if there's a woman elected. That's what actually started the campaign, is to get women elected. And May, out of her own pocket, paid for the advert in the Belfast Telegraph to try and encourage women, if you're interested in standing for politics. And I think within 2 weeks there were 70 women came forward to put their names forward for election. And that was the action. May wasn't one for words without the action. And I firmly believe it was about equality, and it was about trying to get a gender balance. And if we can't get that gender balance, we need women round that table. And that's the way she was throughout her life. But that's, trade union training, you're a socialist, you want the best for everybody. It wasn't about us and them. It was about equity, fair's fair, and those who need it the most are the ones that should get it the most.
Better you have to keep your balance in the politics of Northern Ireland too. You've got the Shankill Road. There's lots of different interests work on the Shankill Road all the time. Anybody who's done community work knows that. It's life. How did May negotiate the politics of all of that? Community and all of that. How did she stay in a way? I always feel she stayed slightly above it, but yeah, maybe it's slightly outside it if it's about the private thing.
I think you took the words right in my mouth there. I was just going to say she rose above it. And she didn't. I had never known her to. I mean, in the Shankill too, if you're involved in anything, they kind of place you in a box. And I think that she got herself onto a sort of a level where nobody could place her, nobody could put her into any kind of a box by using the words that she used. And I suppose it was as well by her involvement with early years. I mean, who could sort of say, well, you must like that grouping better than you like that grouping because you're involved in early years, all early years, and women and mothers and children all stretch straight across that. And I think that's just what she did. She rose above it and didn't give any indication that anybody could put any tags or any labels on her, And she wasn't a bit behind the door either. If somebody did say something, she was quite happy to come back at them. Yeah.
Do you think that, in some ways the Shankill Women's Centre has to do exactly the same as what May does, is just basically work with everybody, keep your focus on the stuff? So it's kind of like if not a role model, at least somebody who's definitely in the tradition that you're following it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. This is definitely what I try to do. All you need to do is get your head down, get on with it, and when people see results and see what you're supposed to do and you're doing it and you get the outcomes, then what have they got to complain about,
Integrated education is one of the most, it's political, but part of the issue is it's about integration, so it's got to rise above party politics if it's to move anywhere. So it's a balancing act as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably what made May so ideal for doing it, Duncan, because as you're asking the question, I'm thinking, well, May was desperately interested in politics. She loved politics. It's just the politicians that used to be. It was always her problem on all sides. And she used to always say, we need to grow a whole new crop of politicians. And that's why in her later years, she got involved in politics in action. She loved all of that. And when she went out to visit the schools, she loved the type of questions that they would ask her. But, and as Eileen saying about the coalition as well, I probably got into trouble for saying this, but May believed it firmly that the coalition did its job. It was a coalition. There's wide ranging of different views on that. But she was so proud. she may not have been happy about maybe the politics of it all, but when she's seen two women become First and Deputy First Minister, May thought that was brilliant. If she was alive today, she would be delighted to see Jane Brady, the first woman, the head of the civil service, especially the fact that she was an engineer. Those things I think would make May very, very proud. But she rose above politics, you know what I mean? When we, as you say, we have to work with everybody, every government, every political party. And I genuinely think if she could see the good in you, no matter what party you were in, she'd work with you. And she always taught me was you don't have to like everybody you work with. Do you know what I mean? You just have to work with them. And so yeah, she was special in that respect. And I think she was respected right across all the parties. I think some of them feared her. But I think if you look across the water, the Labour and the Tories, Lib Dems, they all idolised May Blood, you know. And she only joined the Labour Party in Westminster, but she was a crossbencher initially. But she found the infrastructure around a big political party like Labour could make her life easier. You know what I mean? She got more support and stuff like that. Yeah.
The currency of politics in many ways isn't love. To be loved is to be respected, and. There's a paradox in May, but it's she was very respected, but when she died it was clear she was also loved in a way too, so it was but the respect was first. It was about respect. I'm quite interested in the focus on young people and on early years, and it wasn't Fresh Start, it was Sure Start I was thinking of. Nearly the same. And the commitment to that in the Shankill Road, but also in young people in integrated education. Where did she get that from? What was that? Was that to do with fairness as well? She just thought that's where you have to invest to get the communities to move. Young people, it's where it is.
Yeah, that's stemmed mainly from the Women's Forum, and of course that was the highlight of probably because it was women and it was Women's Forum. We were looking at women's issues, things that affected them. So one of the things that did affect them was the fact that they hardly had any childhood, the women that were there, because of the conflict that would go all growing up in, the lack of skill and the lack of education. We didn't want a generation growing up like that. So early years was developed in order to invest in the children at a very early age. And that sort of morphed then with May into, because early years kind of developed into Sure Start after the funding was finished, but it was a £5 million project, and at one time she was helping develop this project that had over, I think it was something like 85 workers. So I think it was the investment in that, and seeing a group of young people in the Shankill, children, young people growing up to be better citizens and get their education and maybe then bring something back into the Shankill. And right up to she died, she was in her office like every day down in Sure Start. She was very, very keen on that investment and that stuff. And I suppose it links with the schools, with the integrated education as well. So young people mixed in with the education, but I think was really, really strong in her eyes.
So we're coming to an end now, and I suppose just as we're closing, what for you do you think would be the greatest legacy of somebody like May Blood? Because we're now looking at a community moving on to the next stage. This is somebody who like all of us, who live for our times that we live in. But May had so many different aspects. What do you think would be most important to her from your perspective to say this is the thing we have to now keep our eye on and keep moving forward into the future with? Anybody want to take that one up for you? And it's not a right or wrong answer, it's just
I think it is just thinking about her strength in moving forward, and that she's a great role model. She's left behind someone that we can all look up to. And in a more tangible way, I think things like this are good, as well as there's been a bursary set up in her name, and it's been going really, really well, and that's helping back to young people in the Shankill. Our Girl Business Centre's running that, so there's something there that's going to be, hopefully, lifetime.
The easy one for me to say is integrated education, but I think even more important than that, and I've struggled to find that many people like her who genuinely transcend our divisions here. You know, you can look around and you see people who are good people, but they're part of this or part of that. May rose above that. You know, she used to say she'd probably get a better reception walking down the Springfield Road than walking down the Shankill. But she rose above it all, and I think when you can rise above it the way she did, for all the reasons we've talked about, it's a no-brainer that she would be in the integrated education, you know. But I have to say, she was so proud of bringing Sure Start to the Shankill. She was so proud of that, you know, because it was difficult, and she was just, for her legacy thing, she was so proud. And as I say, integrated schools. But just rising above the nonsense that we have to live through in this place was her unique ability, I think.
I think for me, it would probably be bringing our younger generation on and keep not letting go of that younger generation. I know that there's restraints now with funding and packages, but we need that integrated education within communities. You know, that older workers in the community bring on younger ones in to come into the roles before we die, you know, to pass on that knowledge, to pass on that skill. And I think May passed a lot of that on in the work that she done. And I think that we need to actually keep that in mind, because sometimes we get wrapped up into ourselves, and we don't think about bringing that younger generation to take over, you know, the legacies that other people have made before them, and including the May's legacy of integrated education. I often did say to May, you need to bring somebody on board with you. I often did say it. Marcia didn't have time to do it or what, because there's a lot of contacts there that May has in America. Her and Hillary Clinton were the best of buddies, you know, but there's nobody else from that class taking on those roles, meeting up those people that May actually met and befriended when she went to America. And there's nobody else taking on that role. So I think it's something that we need to look at, that we need to keep that working class voice at that level, where it's grassroots and not just politicians who don't live in the areas that May represented, that Betty represents, that I represent, and we need to keep a grasp on that grassroots voice being heard. And I think we have learned that from May, and to keep that legacy going, that we don't give up that grassroots voice at every level of society.
This university is parked with one face looking out at, if you like, the biggest economy of Northern Ireland, the harbour and the city centre. It's parked on the other side looking at the places where the smallest number of people go to university across the whole of Northern Ireland. And we have a dual mandate, which is we have to contribute to that economy, because otherwise we don't do our job. On the other hand, we have to be a university which just turns its back on the communities that are around it. And there's a way of, and part of that is making sure that knowledge is not just one-way street, it's a two-way street, that people are coming in. So this event is obviously in a university. But it's about a person who comes very much from the community, and actually that I think is very important for us too. So we have a slogan that we're trying to work on called Partnerships with Purpose, and I think that is something that May was always about. She built partnerships, but they always had a purpose. They had a purpose which had a deeper social purpose, and I think as a role model today, and as somebody appropriate for us to be talking about in the Look North Festival, it's great. It's not just an academic event, it's something to remember us and to think about where we take all of this this commitment to change and to the people at the bottom, but also to making sure that nobody apologises for anything but just gets on. So I think May's great gift for me, as I say, was she never apologised. She knew what she stood for and she didn't apologise, and it wasn't about aggression, but it was about clarity, and she stuck with that. So listen, Eileen, Paul, Betty, thank you very, very much for coming. I don't think we could have had a better panel, and thank you all for coming.